one of the ways I also love using it in my class is to help students think a lot more critically about a topic. So, debate the bot is one of my favorite ways to deepen students' critical thinking. So, students might believe one thing about, a healthcare policy or whatever it is, and then to ask ChatGPT or Gemini or Bard, whatever tool you're using, debate me on this topic to understand both sides of an issue. Use these tools to really better understand the history of both sides. I think it's a really incredible tool for helping students think critically about what they're viewing and reading.
That was the great Julia Lang, a professor of practice and the associate director of career education and life design at Tulane University's Taylor Center. She returns to the podcast to share everything she's been up to using generative AI in teaching and learning, career development, and more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my upcoming book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. Julia, very excited to have you here. AI is a topic that's reshaping higher education as we speak at a faster clip than anyone imagined. And I'm sure some of the things we think about today will be durable, evergreen insights that continue into the future. Others might become outdated through technological change, and that's quite all right. We got to start somewhere. It's kind of like, when's the best time to plant a tree? 100 years ago. When's the second best time right now? So I'm excited to start right now and have a great conversation about generative AI and higher ed.
Yeah, me too. It's definitely been a hot topic and is a hot topic. And
Yeah.
what I've been seeing is with the release of generative AI, to be honest, I'm seeing a lot of widespread fear and denial and trepidation from both students and my colleagues. Really early on, I started using these tools and I was asked to be on a panel for faculty using generative AI tools. And people were super resistant, faculty and my students as well. The first day of class, I asked students, both my first year students and my seniors, who is using these tools, and not one hand in my class went up. For my first year students, they said that in their high school it was outright banned, and that in a lot of their classes, they were strongly discouraged from using these tools. And on one hand, I understand that. And I tell my students this all the time, that there are ways that you can use these tools that will get you kicked out of college, right? There are ways that you can use these tools that will turn off your brain. And there's ways that you can use these tools that can supercharge your skill sets. So
And
I
to be
think
clear, we
that
don't want the brain off. We want supercharged skill
no.
sets.
Yeah, and so whether it's a working professional or professor or someone in the business world, there's just so many ways that you can harness these tools, and so I think it's part of our duty as educators who are preparing students for the future of work to teach them how to ethically and responsibly harness these tools to support both their educational goals and their professional goals.
Yeah. How do you stay in the supercharged camp and not, unintentionally drift into the brain off, kicked out camp? I think is an important one. And how do you unlock the possibilities and allay the fears at the same time? Well, hopefully our conversation will be part of that and we'll build on all the great work you've already been doing. What struck me is how open you are as you learn something, as you teach something, that you're sharing it online. I just made a custom GPT and like, here's how I did it. And like, this is the hard part and this is the easy part. And here's how I'm using it. And yeah, I just really appreciate you sharing your insights online and with us today. And we'll maybe cover a few, like 5 or 6 different applications. And I think how AI is reshaping admissions is probably as good a place to start anyway. Might as well start at the beginning.
Yeah, and I guess before we get into the big conversation, I appreciate you saying, I'm learning something and then sharing it. And what I love about this moment in time is that we're all kind of in this together, right? Is that these tools are new to so many of us. And I think that the future of technology and the future of work is going to focus on our ability to develop skills to embrace lifelong learning. And that includes reskilling and upskilling to technologies like AI. So, in so many different panels that I've been on and workshops I've been in, people are so scared of this technology and they're scared of being replaced by it. And one of my favorite memes on the internet says, AI will not replace you, but a person using AI will. And so I think, yeah, we can definitely get into admissions or whatever other topics you want to discuss. But that's just been something I've been really thinking about is how can imagining a future of work where AI tools, generative AI tools, are one of the many tools at your fingertips that people are using in any industry.
I love that, thinking about it as a tool like any other tool, but with greater sophistication and power and responsiveness. Personally, I've also felt it really helpful to think about AI as like a team member too, right? Like
Hmm.
if somehow it makes it much more concrete if you're like, oh, in this instance, I'm using it as a research assistant. In this instance,
Hmm.
I'm using it as an editor. In
Yep.
this instance, I'm using it as a coach. In
Yeah.
this instance, I'm using it as a, brainstorming partner or whatever. And if you kind of think of AI as like a member of your
Yep.
team.
One of my beloved mentors, Amjad Ayubi, describes generative AI tools as 100 or 1,000 really eager graduate assistants that are available to help you do any task at any time. And you still have to double check their work, right? Sometimes they get things wrong, but they can really help do that initial brainstorming, research, editing that can get you a lot further than if you were working alone.
Yeah, and with the right direction and feedback, right? I mean, just like an
Right.
intern,
Right. Exactly.
if you give some kind of like mushy, open-ended crap direction, you're going to get crap back probably.
Yep.
But if you specify like an audience and an application
Yep.
and you give your interns good direction, you'll get good work back.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the good work you can get back in admissions.
Yeah. So thinking about AI and admissions, I think that generative AI can really help with efficiency and scalability. So, generative AI tools can process really large volumes of data a lot more efficiently than human staff. So, they can focus on predictive analysis and analytics, pattern recognition, and that can all really help to identify successful candidates. So, my alma mater, Cornell University, actually announced in January that their administrative AI task force, which included over 30 stakeholders from across the university, recommended using generative AI tools for admissions application review and transfer credit evaluation. So this was pretty controversial. I think it maybe was the first Ivy or respected university to come out with such a statement. And what they were talking about is that there is significant potential for AI tools to supplement human evaluation. So, not to replace it, but to supplement it, both for undergraduate and graduate applications, simply given the volume of applications that Cornell receives. A lot of industry professionals are already using AI, like applicant tracking systems, to generate large numbers of applications. And so AI could potentially really speed up the application review process, give applicants a faster response. That said, there is definitely some concern around using AI in admissions. So while AI tools can potentially find really talented applicants who might also be traditionally overlooked in admissions processes, something that I talk about a lot, you can easily Google this or even ask AI itself what concerns or what some issues might be, is that AI is prone to bias that's embedded in the human decisions on which they are trained. So I do think that there is some cause for alarm of, you know, AI can inherit the biases that their data is trained on. And so that can be a concern. And there are ways that it could really comb through applications in a more equitable and faster way than humans would be able to do so in the initial review.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. This is an unanswerable question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Like, is it easier to take the bias out of AI system or out of a human system? I think about the things that have been done to remove bias systemically in like hiring, like redacting candidate names or
Yep.
school names or
Yep.
publishing salary transparency. Those are basically ways of removing human bias from the system. Like I would imagine, technically speaking, it might be easier to remove those biases from AI rather than a whole group of admissions counselors and reviewers.
Yeah, and the landscape is also evolving for how to actually remove bias. Because if you're a practitioner, it's actually really hard to do that. If you're not a machine learning expert and you can't reprogram the algorithms, there's not much you can do on an individual level. And you can do internal audits, right? So you can say that you have this whole system that's going. And like you said before, with imagining AI like a graduate assistant or someone that you're training, you can train it in the moment. And you can also just check and see what's happening, right? You can put in some data, see what the results are, and then have a group of humans actually go in and look at it and see if they would agree or disagree with that decision.
You do
Definitely.
like 5 applications one way and 5 applications the other
Exactly.
way, and you see
Yeah. Yeah.
what's coming up. That's interesting. So pros, you can process tons of data quickly. You can spot patterns that you might not otherwise. You can be responsive to applicants because you're processing things more efficiently. But cons are, because you're doing that, you might amplify biases that are built into systems, or maybe even hide them in ways because some of the analysis is happening in a black box that,
Hmm.
the average user can't look into.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think another interesting implication is how you can give certain prompts, right? So, say that an admissions team is looking to round out their class of people that are really creative, right? You can give it a certain prompt, and then for these tools to be able to really comb through admissions packets, including their essays, including their resumes, and to maybe pull out things that a human just scanning something might miss. So, with the average employer, the average person looking at a resume spends about 30 seconds looking at it, right? And they're gonna miss a lot, just especially when they're going through hundreds or thousands of applications. Whereas generative AI tools are gonna comb every word, every sentence in a lot more depth, and then be able to pull that out in ways that a human might miss if they were responsible for looking at these essays and resumes for hours and hours every day for weeks or months at a time.
Right. Yeah. You can go looking for specific things. You
Mhm.
need our orchestra is missing an oboe player.
Right. Yeah.
So that's in admissions. What about once students arrive? How is AI changing the curriculum that they'll see and
Mhm.
learn?
Yeah, so AI tools can create content really quickly. So, whether that's quizzes or worksheets or helping with administrative tasks, even like grading assignments or generating progress reports, which can really free up instructional activities. I have yet to use AI for grading, I will say, although I do know that that is something that is possible to do. The main way that I've been using generative AI tools is actually to help develop curricula or adapt curricula based on student performance or on emerging educational trends. So, for instance, as a faculty member, I can put in an idea for a class and ask ChatGPT or Gemini or Bard to generate a 14-week syllabus. And some of it I'll keep, some of it I'll throw out, but just to see, right, based off of it combing all of the different, everything that's ever been published online, if I'm making a class on a certain topic, what are elements I might want to include?
Like, I want to teach a 14-week class on how AI can enable student success.
Yeah.
Let's see what comes out
I'm
of that.
actually
So,
doing that right now. I'm teaching a class in the
oh my
fall.
gosh.
It's basically leveraging ChatGPT for personal and professional development, like AI supercharging skills. So I wrote a proposal for this class, why I thought it was important. I put in that proposal and said, I got this approved. Now create a 14-week syllabus for what I should include or could include to teach students how to leverage these skills for their personal and professional development. And within 2 seconds, I had 14 weeks broken out. I then said, okay, do a little more of this, a little less of this. I can adapt it. Another way that I've been using it, which has been really helpful, and if you're an author, one of my favorite ways to use it is to put in something that I've written, especially if I'm trying to make a case, like I've been writing some editorials, and then to ask, what am I missing? Are there any main points that I should be including that I have not included? And every single time I've done that, I have been presented with a point that is spot on and really helps my argument.
That's really cool. I've been using it a lot, to turn an outline into text and then edit it and refine it and add
Mhm.
references and so forth. But yeah, that the generative aspect. So we've got generate content, brainstorm curricula, evaluate writing or a case for something. What are some other curricular applications?
I think the real-time update is something that's really helpful. Is as a faculty member, I often develop my syllabi in the summer when I have time, and then I'm in the middle of the semester and things are happening really quickly. But at any given moment, I can also put in my syllabus, and it can be a way immediately to integrate the latest research or
Uh,
global movements into the curriculum as quickly and efficiently as possible. I think similarly, it can also really help with blending subjects from different disciplines to create more comprehensive and interdisciplinary courses. Say that you're an expert in one area and you want to integrate some trends or curricula from a whole other field, but you don't know that field that well, you can prompt it in that way as well, and I've seen some really interesting results.
that reminds me of like another metaphor, right? If it's a research assistant or an editor or a brainstorming partner, it could also kind of be like a referee. Part of why collaboration across disciplines doesn't always happen is like sometimes you need that like neutral third party to say, I want to take this part of this and this part of this. And if you could have, I mean, maybe referee isn't the right word, but there isn't a fight. Sometimes there is a fight. But, taking things from different disciplines and having kind of like a neutral third
Mhm.
party give you a fresh perspective on how to combine them.
Yeah,
That's really interesting.
absolutely, I love that. Well, and just thinking about it, giving fresh perspectives, one of the ways I also love using it in my class kind of in real time is to help students think a lot more critically about a topic. So, debate the bot is one of my favorite ways to deepen students' critical thinking is to so students might believe one thing about, a healthcare policy or whatever it is, and then to ask ChatGPT or Gemini or Bard, whatever tool you're using, is I believe XYZ, right? I believe in healthcare access for all women, whatever. Debate me on this topic. And it'll actually do that in real time or like to understand both sides of an issue if there's some sort of controversial topic or something that's happening in the world, is to use these tools to really better understand the history of both sides and then to fact check it. Because again, not everything that is generated is accurate. So I also think it's a really incredible tool for helping students think critically about what they're viewing and reading. And in the era of fake news, right, where I pull up a news article online and I can't just take that at face value. I have to think about where the content's coming from, and there's just been so much propaganda and fake news, and it's same thing with ChatGPT or Gemini or Bard that the output looks so professional. It has great grammar, right? And it looks like it has the sense of authority, but sometimes it's plain wrong. And so using it both to be like, huh, that's interesting, but then also to close that loop and really fact check and see that is actually what it generated accurate or not. And I think that that helps students develop a much more critical lens in general, just in terms of what they are digesting constantly as we're in this very media driven, technologically driven society where there's so much content that we're constantly digesting.
Those are really good examples and applications. And I love here are some specific ways that it can help students think critically, through debate, through fact checks. Some of our applications here about curricula were more like faculty or instructor focused about syllabus development updates, turning a proposal into a syllabus. What about from the student perspective? Like, let's pull on this debate the bot, learn critical thinking thread. Like, what are the other skills that AI can help students develop?
So many. Let's start with research. So I'm looking for research topics in insert subject, generate 20 interesting topics and provide a brief overview of each one. Or to help students generate questions, right? I'm planning a research project in a certain area, create 30 research questions or hypotheses that I could explore. It can help students think about or get resources or ideas for what sort of data collection they might want to use. It can help them summarize data, like scanning notes, providing a list of major themes from research. It can also provide one on one custom support. So, say that a student has encountered a challenge, whether it's at research or even with a roommate or with a faculty member. You can also say, I'm experiencing this challenge. Help me brainstorm solutions or suggest alternative approaches to address this challenge. It can help with explaining research. So, describe my project in simple terms as you would to a high schooler, right? Students are trying to say that they're in a highly technical field and they're preparing for interviews in another field, another domain. They can help with that as well.
Those are such great examples. The last one, I did a campus wide study on kind of the learning and research experience. And one of the interesting things for that was that, particularly at the master's level, at the grad level, the biggest barrier to interdisciplinary collaboration, despite a ton of interest, was difficulty communicating technical fields across
Mhm,
disciplines.
mhm.
And just having someone be able to boil it down, or
Yeah,
work with you to boil it down so that you can find common ground with a collaborator. If you're
yep.
in political science and you're trying to work with someone in data science,
Again, supporting that
whatever it might be.
interdisciplinary
Yeah.
research collaboration as well.
Yeah.
On a completely other domain of life, learning languages is such an incredible way to learn languages. So, say a student is about to travel abroad to Ecuador, they can put in, speak to me in Spanish about the history and politics of Ecuador. I will respond in Spanish and correct me with any grammar mistakes that I make. And so sometimes I talk to my students about, consider ChatGPT or whatever platform you're using, to consider these tools as an incredible knowledge base on any topic in any language that you might want to know. And I've actually had students do this where they don't have a conversational partner in a certain language, and they've been using these tools to help them prepare for studying abroad or to learn a new language. You can also use the microphone function on your computer. So instead of typing text, you can actually speak into it. And that can also help with interview prompts. So I'm in the world of career education, and I've been using these tools and teaching students how to use these tools to prepare for interviews. So, for instance, I'm preparing for an interview for an entry level position in communications at a data marketing firm. Ask me questions to help me prepare for this interview. So, in any field, you can use ChatGPT or these other tools to help with that. I've also found it really helpful to help students with time management and productivity and organization. So, that's something students struggle a lot with, and it can help them to create schedules, to prioritize tasks, to organize tasks, to run efficient meetings. So sometimes students are in charge of clubs and they're trying to run meetings, but they don't have a lot of experience doing that. And it can actually help create agenda
Yeah.
setting. Yeah, you can use tools to actually provide live transcripts, right? So say that we're not doing it right now, but if you had an AI tool recording this conversation, after our conversation ends, it would give you a summary of every topic we talked about and the
Right.
main points of each one that we discussed, which saves you a lot of
Yeah.
time in terms of having to transcribe that interview.
I pull it into Descript,
Yeah.
and having
Communication
that live.
skills. I can't tell you how many horrible emails I get from students. And I always beg them, I'm like, please just use these tools to help you write more professional emails to your professors. It will set you so far above the random emails that we get of, hi, I'm going to be late to class today. I'm like, what section are you in? Can you say, have a nice day? Can you say, how are you doing? So, yeah, with communication skills as well.
So we've got communication, critical thinking, time management, languages, interview prompts, research, the
Career prep, goal
career
setting.
prep,
Yeah.
goal setting, coaching. Yeah, so many great applications, and I feel like you sort of caught yourself
Yeah.
personifying it, and you said you don't like to. Could you
Yeah.
tell me a little bit more about that? Because you were kind of think of it like a person, and you're like, no, wait, I don't want to. I don't.
Yeah. Well,
Tell me
it's
more about that.
yeah, I am hesitant to think of AI tools like a person because that's how it's presented, right? It's presented like
Mhm.
there's just someone sitting behind your screen that's responding to you, but that is not at all how these tools operate. It's pulling from large amounts of data and it's generating based on what you're putting. It's literally looking at the words that came before and then generating text in front of that. And it's the same way I don't like to personify an animal or it's a very different beast. This is completely new realm and we cannot think about it like humans because it is not human. I mean, it's pulling from human data, but it is a very different operating system and yeah, there's a lot of potential for it to be enormously helpful to humans, but it can also cause a lot of harm. And it's not human. It's a machine and it's a vast amount of machine learning and machines combined. So I'm just reluctant to think about it like a human.
Understood. Yeah, those are all good reasons. So, ping ponging a little bit back to the faculty instructor point of view, we
Mhm.
were just talking about how it can help students, I guess related, but what about in terms of evaluating or giving feedback on the work that those students are doing. When you get the email that's written by AI, or you are working with someone who's learning a language, or you're evaluating the debate or the research that came out of this AI collaboration, like how can you use it for that feedback, evaluation, grading, application?
Yeah, so I think it can help provide a lot more personalized and in-depth feedback than maybe a faculty member might have time to provide on their own. So kind of doing that initial scan, pulling out errors or pulling out kind of the main ideas. But I do think with everything, it has to be supplemented by human analysis and critical review as well. So I do think it can really support faculty in doing some grading and review. But at the end of the day, it's the faculty member that's working with the students, right? And so it can help me get a snapshot of how my students are feeling on a certain topic based on a review they've submitted, and then that can feed into this discussion that I'm having in class. But if I rely solely on these AI tools, then that's doing a disservice to my students because they're not getting any of my personal input and evaluation. And then I'm not then creating that link with the content that's covered in class. And I think on the student side, what I have encouraged my students to do is to use these tools to do their research, to brainstorm, to kind of experiment with how they can use these tools, and then to submit a screenshot of what was generated, and then to also submit kind of their analysis of it or their reflection based on what was generated. So to teach them how to use the tools, but then to also teach them that crucial part of doing the critical analysis themselves as well and their own human judgment and evaluation of what is created.
I'm of the age where the TI-85 came on the scene as I was learning math in high school. We were encouraged to use it, but it became even more important to like show your work, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it sounds like that's kind of the case here, but like supercharged, where you're encouraging people to use generative AI in their work, but students need to like show like what was the prompt, like what was the output, what did you do with
Yeah.
it, so I can kind of see how you got from here to there.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess going back to your question also of how it can be used to support students in terms of feedback and evaluation. So, generative AI tools, independent of the faculty member, generative AI tools can offer one-on-one coaching, support, or tutoring in any language to any grade level on any topic, right? So even if you have a totally checked out faculty member or someone who's not helpful, students can use these tools to get support that they might not have access to on their own. On the faculty side, faculty might not have the time or capacity to provide really in-depth feedback. And so AI can provide personalized feedback to students. It can identify strengths and weaknesses on any argument. It can also offer early interventions by identifying students at risk. This isn't something that I've done as much, but I have been hearing this from colleagues, which I think is a really interesting use case of generative AI tools. And it can also provide real-time feedback to students and teachers or faculty and help them identify where students might be struggling and allow for that immediate intervention that sometimes sometimes things just snowball. A student doesn't come to class and then wants them at work and then but you're busy doing something else. But if you were to actually set up these kind of checks and balances, it could help identify those students who are at risk a lot more early than when students are kind of lost in the sea of being on campus.
That makes a ton of sense, and it also like dovetails with some other student success best practices, right? Which is like do some quick low stakes assessment early. The point is not to wait till the midterm to find out that somebody like that your
Exactly.
students aren't getting it, whether it's all of them or some of them. If you have your AI curriculum and assessment assistant able to,
Yep.
generate some quick, give me a 3-question weekly quiz as part of your syllabus development, it's just that much easier to do that low stakes assessment.
Yeah, and a lot of my students are in classes that have one midterm and one final exam. So while a faculty member may only have a set number of quizzes, tests, or essays in their course that they personally grade, AI tools can allow for so much more continuous assessment and learning adjustments, which can really allow for a much more dynamic educational experience for the students. And like you said, to kind of have those checks and balances to check for the learning leading up to the midterm, leading up to the final exam, instead of the only assessment, the only way students are checking if they're getting it or not is exactly halfway through the course and then at the very end.
Yeah. And to me, that's also this is super obvious because it's like baked into the design thinking ethos, right? You're testing things along the way as opposed to like waiting for some big reveal.
Right.
You don't want to be the Tropicana or, or Gap rebrand where all of a sudden you unveil this thing that nobody understands and everybody
Right.
hates. You
And
don't
talk
want
about
to
like
be the
student
first.
mental health with that too,
Yeah.
right? We're having a mental health crisis on our campuses, and that only feeds into it when students, there's so much anxiety around this one assessment they're going to have in the middle and this one assessment they're going to have at the end. Whereas it can actually be a lot more validating and give them a lot more confidence if they're realizing that they're getting it along the way.
Yeah. It just seems like it makes the pulse taking so much easier. And then students know where they are and faculty know where the students are. So the midterm isn't this big reveal, big surprise. You have some sense of, how you're doing and whether, office hours would help or tutoring or go to the tutoring center.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like just like your admissions use case, the ability to go through a lot of data quickly, to identify, who might benefit from going to the tutoring center or whatever it might be, or some more coaching. I think that's a really good segue to thinking about how, like, we started off talking about concerns about bias in admissions. How we turn that frown upside down and enable a more inclusive, more accessible, more equitable future using AI.
Yeah. So I want to get to the accessibility and inclusivity conversation. And I think what feeds into that is just the responsibility of universities to teach these tools and to teach them about how they can be really helpful, but then also how they can be really harmful. So if any educator is listening to this, I implore you to embed AI knowledge, embed some module or some class in your course about generative AI, and knowing that we're trying to prepare students for a future dominated by AI technologies. And so part of this includes teaching students how to use these tools to supercharge their skills, but it also includes teaching students about the shadow side. So they're not just
Right.
blindly putting in all of their data or assuming all their information outputted is accurate. So, if any educators listening, just to include the ethical issues related to AI, including privacy and security, even societal impacts of automation. And I guess I wanted to say that before we get into this talk about accessibility and inclusivity, because I'm really excited about generative AI tools in terms of how it can provide a more equitable and more accessible landscape for people. And I would be remiss to not say that these tools can also really cause a lot of harm. And if students are not being taught about the shadow side of them, then they can only do so much good.
You have to start with the Hippocratic oath of like,
Right. Exactly.
first do no
Exactly.
harm,
Yeah.
then find ways to be inclusive and equitable.
Yeah. But on the topic of accessibility and inclusivity, I actually went to a session last week hosted by the Goldman Institute, which is Tulane's Accessibility Center. And it was run by two of their staff members who were sharing how excited they were about AI as the next iteration of assistive technologies for people with disabilities. So, generative AI tools have the potential to revolutionize learning for students with disabilities by making information more accessible. By that, I mean it can summarize information, it can convert text to alternative formats, it can be programmed to follow any provided accessibility guidelines. For instance, for someone who is blind, AI can describe a visual environment through a photo. It can produce and verbalize alternative text for images. It can simplify what might otherwise be complex physical or mental tasks, such as helping someone who's dyslexic to learn a complex topic, or supporting someone with low social skills or vision impairment in writing an email that might otherwise lead them to a lot of mental fatigue or stress. It can make study guides. It can improve reading accessibility. So, for instance, make this passage at a ninth grade level. It can help with brainstorming, put these notes into a flowchart. It can define a step by step process, like filling out a planner or prioritizing tasks. So, yeah, there's so many ways that I think it can really help students who have different disabilities to be able to reach their educational and professional goals.
That's really great. I appreciate those examples. So if one way for AI, to create a more inclusive world is to be the next generation of assistive technologies, do you see other applications?
Yeah, I mean, think about someone who English is not their native language and they're trying to improve a resume or cover letter, prepare for an interview, or learn a different language. I think it can help with that. I think it can also create more inclusivity on the employer side. So for an employer who's interested in having a more equitable and inclusive interview practice. So for instance, an employer might put in, how might I create an inclusive interview process for someone with autism, right? Like we don't know what we don't know. And so being able to use these tools to provide more access with tutoring, right? Only more privileged, wealthy students have had access to one-on-one tutoring for SATs or ACTs. With generative AI tools, you can have a one-on-one tutor on any subject at any grade level. I think there's definitely some equity concerns there, like you need access to the internet. People that can afford GPT-4 or the paid subscriptions are going to have a better service than people that don't. And the basic platforms, like the unpaid platforms, are also pretty helpful. All the work I've been doing with students in my classes with all the ChatGPT guides that I've made were all with the free versions. And students have been really blown away by how it can support their learning and supercharge their skill sets just with the free version as well. I think I'm not in the medical field, but I do have a friend who is, and we were talking the other day just about what she sees as a doctor and kind of how these technologies might inform her practice. And she was talking about how AI and robotics combined could be revolutionary for prosthetics and for helping people with physical disabilities as well.
That's amazing. These are all great examples. Any final words of wisdom about using AI to reshape higher education?
As educators, it is our job to help prepare students for the future and for the future of work. And so I believe we have a duty to teach students how to ethically and responsibly harness these tools at their fingertips. Students are always going to use tools that they have access to, especially in technology. And so I would just encourage any educator to try on these tools. They don't have to keep them, right? They don't have to use them, but I think it also increases our relevance as educators when we're on top of the technology that is available. I absolutely understand why people are scared and hesitant of these technologies. I'm currently having to rethink my whole class, right? I can no longer say, read this article and provide a summary or your review of it because students can easily put that article in. And it is requiring a massive shifting of the way that we teach and how we assess learning. One of my favorite meditations by Thich Nhat Hanh talks about how people respond to change. And he describes a boulder coming down a hill. And some people are in front of that boulder, running as fast as they can away from it as it comes pummeling down the mountain behind them. Whereas other people learn how to dance atop of the boulder with nimble, quick feet as it comes down the hill. And I think we're at this moment now where we can just try to run as fast as we can away from the technology that's here, or we can learn how to work with it to support the work that we're doing with students. And in
That's
doing
great.
so, better support students for the work that they're inevitably going to have in the future.
Thank you, Julia. Great insights.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.